Today, we're examining the dumbest ways people died. From a genius kitchen hack that erupted into a fireball, to a veteran tree climber who believed experience made him untouchable, until gravity corrected him in the most haunting way possible. It was January 8th, 2017. Behind a mid-rise apartment block on Chicago's west side, a narrow alley lay wet with melting snow and gray slush. Utility boxes lined the brick wall. Lights in several units flickered on and off. Feral cats moved quietly between dumpsters as residents came and went. The apartment belonged to Maribel Quince, 57, a receptionist at a mid-sized dental practice off McHenry Avenue. She worked split shifts, opened the front desk early, then returned after lunch to chase insurance authorizations. She prided herself on handling problems herself. Calling for help felt unnecessary when patience and effort usually work just as well. Money was steady but tight. She avoided service calls, followed home remedy forums, and distrusted harsh cleaners after a bad skin reaction years earlier. Cooking was her way to unwind, so the oven ran almost daily. Grease baked into the racks for months while she told herself she would deal with it on her next weekday off, without paying someone to do it for her. The Wednesday, she had the late shift. She planned to clean quickly before leaving. The oven was an older gas model from the early 1990s with a constant pilot light and a door that never sealed tightly. Online posts claimed gasoline broke down grease instantly. She treated it like a practical shortcut, not a hazard. The warnings were printed clearly on the red plastic gas can. She read them before and ignored them. The apartment had a working smoke alarm, but no kitchen exhaust fan. She shut the windows to keep fumes from drifting into the hallway. The air inside grew warm and still, allowing vapors to linger instead of dissipate. She brought the gas can from the garage, opened the oven, and poured gasoline over the racks and into the bottom pan before closing the door. Instead of wiping it out immediately, she sat down nearby to let it soak. As the gasoline evaporated, vapors escaped through the loose door seal, spread along the floor, and accumulated throughout the kitchen. The pilot light burned steadily beneath the oven floor, shielded but exposed to the surrounding air. When the vapor concentration reached it, ignition occurred instantly. The fire flashed back into the oven cavity and expanded faster than the door could contain it. The oven door blew outward with explosive force. It tore free from the hinges and crossed the kitchen in a fraction of a second. The door struck Maribel squarely in the chest and face while she was still seated, snapping her head back into the cabinet behind her. The chair collapsed under the impact. The pressure wave shattered the nearby window and burst cabinet doors open. Wood fragments and glass sprayed across the room. A second ignition followed as vapor suspended in the air caught fire, producing a rolling fireball that swept across the kitchen and into the living space. Maribel was thrown sideways off the broken chair and onto the floor. She struck the back of her head against the cabinet edge and did not move again. The blast fractured her skull and ruptured internal organs. Burns appeared on her arms and clothing, but she never regained consciousness. A neighbor heard the explosion and called 911. Firefighters arrived approximately 9 minutes after dispatch and forced entry into the unit as fire damage spread from the kitchen. The fire was extinguished quickly, but the apartment was structurally unsafe. Maribel was found near the oven amid debris. The medical examiner later reported death from blunt force trauma and internal injuries caused by the blast. Smoke inhalation and burns were not contributing factors. Investigators found gasoline residue inside the oven and along the floor where vapors had pooled. The cat was recovered alive from a bedroom. The incident was ruled accidental, caused by the improper use of a flammable liquid near a continuous ignition source. Local coverage was limited to a brief news report and a fire department warning about household fuels. The apartment was later condemned due to structural damage and demolished. The lot was cleared, the warning forgotten, and the space returned to normal use. Just months earlier, and hundreds of miles away, another ordinary place was already filling with people who assumed nothing serious could happen there. It was August 3rd, 2016. A minor league stadium in central Arizona sat under steady heat, seats partially filled as early spectators filtered in for an evening game, music playing softly while players stretched along the field. Batting practice was brief and informal due to the heat, with players taking only a few swings before stepping back into shade. The sound of balls popping into gloves mixing with idle conversation and the scrape of shoes across concrete walkways. Kellen Rourke was 28 years old, a warehouse logistics clerk who worked rotating shifts moving freight for a regional distribution company. His job rewarded speed and physical awareness, and he took pride in being dependable under pressure. Outside work, he chased validation through physical dares, pickup sports, and online attention. He wasn't reckless by reputation, but he liked being seen as capable, fast, and unafraid of embarrassment. He followed baseball casually and attended games when tickets were cheap. He had no formal training, no experience judging professional bat speed, but he talked often about reflexes. Friends described him as the type who leaned into moments when cameras came out. That afternoon, 2 co-workers filmed short clips for social media, hoping for something funny to post before the game even started. Batting practice is not designed for spectators. Balls come off the bat at speeds exceeding 90 miles per hour, often without warning, and players focus inward. The area near the dugout is separated by low railings meant to discourage leaning. Announcements played periodically, reminding fans to stay alert. Kellen arrived early enough to stand close enough to interact. He leaned over the railing, watching a player reset between swings. The mascot, a large dog costume figure, moved through the aisle behind him, drawing cheers. Kellen waved at the batter and shouted that he didn't need a glove. A nearby fan offered one anyway. Kellen refused, smiling toward the phone pointed at him. The player hesitated. Then he swung. The ball came off the bat low and hard, traveling at near-game velocity. Kellen reached forward instinctively, hands open. The ball struck his palms, forced them apart, and dropped straight down. It hit the left anterior side of his neck, producing a sharp, hollow sound audible on video. He collapsed immediately into the seat. The impact fractured cartilage in the larynx and caused a tear in the carotid artery wall. Blood flow to the brain dropped abruptly. His body stiffened briefly, then went slack. Stadium medics reached him in under a minute. He was unresponsive and not breathing normally. CPR began immediately in the aisle as nearby fans were moved back. Emergency services were called at once. Despite a rapid response, there was no detectable pulse by the time paramedics arrived. Resuscitation efforts continued during transport, but he was later pronounced dead at a nearby hospital. The medical examiner later explained that the blow caused severe blunt force trauma to the neck. The airway collapsed, and arterial damage caused rapid loss of cerebral oxygenation. Death would have occurred within seconds to a minute. There was no evidence of prolonged suffering. The player was cleared of wrongdoing. Stadium staff reviewed footage and quietly reinforced safety messaging near the dugout in the weeks that followed. No formal league statement was issued. The video stopped circulating within days, replaced by the next moment someone thought would be harmless. The footage stopped circulating, and the stadium moved on to the next game. In the Philippines, a veteran of the Heights was about to learn that decades of experience don't make a trunk any softer when you decide to ignore the gravity of the situation. It was June 21, 2018, in a residential yard in Cagayan City, Philippines, where early heat settled over concrete and packed soil. A trimmed coconut tree stood at the center of the lot. Tools lay on the ground, a dog moved restlessly through the shade, and routine work continued without urgency. Ramil Desto was 37, a freelance tree worker paid per job, known locally for finishing removals fast. He had no formal certification, but years of experience trimming palms after storms. He owned his ropes, spikes, and chainsaw, worked alone often, and regularly ignored basic fall zone protocols. Small contractors hired him because he underbid competitors and promised speed over procedures every time, even when jobs demanded caution alone. He supported 2 children from a previous relationship and took cash jobs to stay flexible. Friends described him as calm in trees and impatient on the ground. He followed online removal videos, copied techniques, and skipped harnesses when homeowners watched. Finishing early mattered. Another booking waited that afternoon across town. Speed kept his ratings high and avoided questions about permits, insurance, or written safety plans from cautious property owners nearby. The job involved removing a mature coconut tree close to a concrete wall and less than 15 feet from power lines. The homeowner wanted the trunk dropped cleanly into a narrow yard. The weather was dry with intermittent gusts above 20 miles per hour at canopy height. Standard practice required descent before cutting, yet Ramil insisted that pruning reduced danger enough to compensate for staying aloft during the final cut, despite objections from the ground crew present nearby. He climbed early, removed heavy fronds and coconuts, and signaled completion. The mixed-breed dog barked below as the crew repositioned. One helper warned that the trunk could be a barber chair. Ramil waved him off, remaining seated against the trunk, saying his weight would guide the fall and save time. No helmet, no harness, and no escape plan remained once the saw engaged the base of the trunk, despite repeated warnings earlier that morning. The chainsaw started, biting into the trunk from the yard side. Fibers cracked unevenly, and the wind shifted. Ramil clamped his legs tighter against the trunk and leaned back. Below, the cut deepened past control, and the trunk began to split vertically along the grain. Witnesses later described a pause, then a sudden split that changed the direction entirely. The trunk split vertically instead of falling forward. The upper section rotated toward the house, snapping free. Ramil was thrown chest first into the moving wood. Multiple ribs were fractured immediately, and the impact collapsed his sternum. The trunk struck the ground, pinning him beneath, compressing his chest cavity and neck as air was forced from his lungs. Breathing ceased within seconds, while the weight prevented any movement. The dog circled, barking as dust settled and leaves shook loose above him. Emergency services were called immediately. They tried lifting the trunk, but could not budge it. Ramil showed no response. There was no visible breathing or purposeful movement. Blood seeped slowly into the soil from facial abrasions as a neighbor recorded from a distance, and another attempted CPR but could not access his chest beneath the trunk, minutes stretching until sirens arrived nearby, finally audible, then stopping. Responders arrived 12 minutes after the call. They confirmed death at the scene. Chest compression had caused immediate respiratory failure, followed by cardiac arrest. The body was extricated only after cutting the trunk. The postmortem listed massive blunt trauma. The collapsed rib cage prevented lung expansion, and neck compression disrupted blood flow to the brain. There was no survival window. Death was rapid and unavoidable, unrelated to blood loss or secondary injuries sustained elsewhere. The homeowner was cited for safety violations, but no charges were filed after the death was ruled accidental. The stump remained in the yard for weeks before removal, a silent reminder that the outcome was caused by an ignored procedure, not bad luck. Yet, you don't need to be hanging from a tree to find a life-ending hazard. Sometimes, the difference between a normal Tuesday and a gruesome end is as simple as 5 minutes of patience. We've got more dumb deaths like this ahead, so subscribe if you want to see how everyday confidence turns routine decisions into irreversible mistakes in seconds. It was November 19th, 2013. Downtown Milwaukee moved at its usual weekday pace, with buses idling at intersections and concrete dust drifting lightly in the 32-degree air. A fenced construction site sat between two active streets, inactive that morning, its temporary barriers and exposed frameworks blending into the routine city background. Climbing the fence was Elira Mawson, 19 years old. She was a first-year hospitality student at a local technical college. She worked evenings as a hostess at a riverfront restaurant and mornings cleaning rooms at a small airport hotel. Her schedule was tight, and she hated waiting or taking longer routes when shortcuts were available. She paid her own rent, shared textbooks, and tracked every hour carefully. Friends described her as practical, restless, and impatient with inefficiency. Her interests were ordinary: budgeting apps, secondhand shoes, short walks to save bus fare. The city itself had become part of her routine. Over time, she learned which blocks reduced walking time and which barriers people routinely ignored without consequences, until that day. That afternoon, she was running behind and didn't want to take the longer marked detour. A familiar construction site blocked her usual shortcut. The detour sign pointed her 2 blocks east. She stopped near the fence, checked her phone, and hesitated briefly before moving forward. The detour would have added 5 minutes. Climbing the fence felt faster. She had crossed here before. No prior injuries had occurred. The weather was dry but cold, the ground stiff with early frost. Temporary fencing rattled lightly in the wind. Posted warnings clearly marked open excavations and exposed materials, but the site looked quiet, and she assumed nothing had changed. No workers were present. No machinery was moving. Elira stepped toward the fence while typing a message to her manager. She gripped the top rail with one hand, swung a leg up, and shifted her weight forward. The rail flexed more than expected. Her foot slipped on loose gravel piled at the base. The fence bowed inward. Her balance went with it. She pitched forward, losing her grip, falling chest first into the site. Below the fence line, a length of vertical rebar protruded from an unfinished footing, rising approximately 3 feet from the concrete, left uncapped. The metal entered her pelvis and drove upward through her lower abdomen. The force stopped her body abruptly, pinning her upright against the fence. Her phone fell to the ground. She screamed immediately, loud and continuous, hands gripping the fence as blood spread through her clothing and pooled beneath her shoes. Witnesses saw her legs tremble, then buckle as blood poured down her thighs and pooled at her feet. She stayed conscious, mouth open, pulling short, wet breaths as the rebar fixed her in place and pressure built inside her abdomen. Within minutes, her breathing thinned to shallow gasps, her head dropping forward as her weight sagged against the steel. A pedestrian called 911 while another held the fence to keep it from shifting. No one attempted to move her because the metal was visibly embedded through her body. Sirens were heard within 5 minutes. Paramedics arrived 7 minutes after the call, found massive blood loss and a failing pulse, and pronounced her dead at the scene, still pinned to the rebar. The medical examiner later determined the cause of death was a massive internal hemorrhage resulting from pelvic and abdominal penetration. The metal had torn major blood vessels and organs. Loss of consciousness occurred shortly before cardiac arrest due to hypovolemic shock. The site was inspected the next morning, and exposed rebar was capped by the end of the week. No citations were issued, and coverage was limited to a brief local notice. The shortcut stayed blocked, foot traffic adjusted, and the site quickly faded back into the city. Recorded as an accidental death, few people stopped to remember. Within days, the construction site blended back into the city, and foot traffic adjusted. The shortcut stayed blocked, and the world moved on. But the most dangerous traps aren't always behind a fence. Sometimes they are wired into the very walls we live in. It was January 8th, 2017. Behind a mid-rise apartment block on Chicago's west side, an alley lay slick with melting snow and gray slush. Power blinked on and off across several units. Dumpsters lined the walls. Feral cats moved quietly between shadows, unnoticed by residents inside the buildings around them. One of the residents was Thomas Virak, who was 31. He is a rideshare driver working long overnight shifts to cover rent and car payments. He leased a Toyota Camry through a regional fleet program and drove for Uber and Lyft interchangeably. He handled his own oil changes, brake pads, and minor wiring work, believing small repairs were inflated by service costs. Friends described him as careful with money, but careless with physical risk. He skipped manuals and relied on online forums to fix problems quickly, usually alone. He had complained to building management for months about flickering lights and sudden outages during winter storms. Emails went unanswered. Maintenance requests remained open. Tomas believed downtime cost him income every night the apps forced him offline. He followed automotive repair channels, subscribed to budget tool brands, and assumed residential electricity was manageable if handled deliberately. He had no formal training or licensing, and his repairs were based on familiarity rather than code. That night, temperatures dropped below freezing. Snowmelt pooled unevenly along the alley floor. The power cut out again while Thomas was preparing to leave for a shift. He checked his phone, saw no response from maintenance, and went outside to look. He retrieved a folding ladder and a flathead screwdriver from his trunk. The junction box was mounted about 5 feet high behind trash bins, with exposed conduit running along the brick. The junction box fed multiple apartments and showed visible corrosion. Warning labels were faded and partially peeled. Tomas did not shut off the main breaker inside the building. He removed his boots to steady himself on the ladder rungs and stepped onto damp concrete in socks. Nearby cats scattered as he opened the metal cover and leaned in. He assumed a loose neutral or weather-damaged contact was responsible for the outages. There were no cones, no lockout tags, no insulated gloves. Traffic noise echoed faintly from the street. The screwdriver was uninsulated, its handle cracked from wear. Thomas reached inside the box toward a terminal lug while balancing on the ladder's second rung. Security footage later showed his left hand bracing against the box frame as the tool advanced. The screwdriver bridged two live terminals. A 120-volt arc flashed briefly inside the box. Current traveled through both arms and across his chest. His forearm and hand muscles contracted involuntarily, locking the tool in place. The ladder shifted on wet ground. Thomas's head struck the brick wall behind him, leaving a dark smear where his scalp made contact. Witnesses later said the impact sounded flat, not sharp. Electricity continued flowing for several seconds. His grip did not release. The sustained current disrupted his heart's electrical rhythm almost immediately. When the screwdriver finally fell free, his body collapsed sideways off the ladder and hit the pavement face first. Blood pooled beneath his nose and mouth. There were no purposeful movements after the fall. His chest did not rise again. A nearby resident heard a heavy impact against the brick wall and looked out to see Thomas lying face down at the base of the ladder. The resident called 911 immediately. Emergency crews arrived approximately 6 minutes later and found him unresponsive, pulseless, with small electrical burns on his palms and fingers. Advanced resuscitation was attempted but failed. Feral cats that had been near the dumpsters scattered as sirens filled the alley. The medical examiner ruled the cause of death as cardiac arrhythmia due to electrocution. Small electrical burns were noted on the palms and fingers. Blunt head impact was documented as a contributing injury, but not fatal on its own. The building replaced the junction box and updated warning signage. No criminal charges were filed. The death was listed as accidental. Thomas's rideshare accounts were deactivated within days, and the alley returned to routine use after repairs were completed quietly. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy this video, click here for more.